Chloe Miller had exactly $11.37 left in her pocket, and the week was only half over. She counted the crumpled bills and loose change under the flickering light of the Metro Transit Terminal's staff exit, her fingers still damp from mopping 3,000 square feet of tile floor. The yellow mop bucket sat behind her, tipped sideways against the wall, dripping the last of its dirty water into the utility drain. Her back ached, her knees ached worse, and the smell of industrial floor cleaner had permanently settled into the fabric of her gray maintenance uniform, no matter how many times she washed it. 6 hours of scrubbing, 6 hours of dragging garbage bags heavier than her grocery haul, 6 hours of people walking past her like she was part of the furniture. Tuesday night, 9:17 p.m., Chicago in early November. The kind of cold that doesn't punch you. It just slowly sits on your bones until you forget what warm felt like. Chloe zipped her jacket up to her chin and pushed through the side door into the plaza outside the terminal. The maintenance shift was done, and her second job at the office park across town didn't start until 6 in the morning. That gave her roughly 8 hours to get home, shower, eat something cheap, and maybe, if her brain cooperated, sleep for 5 of those hours. She was halfway across the plaza, head down, hands deep in her pockets, when she saw the woman on the bench. The bench sat near the far edge of the plaza, where the overhead lights barely reached. Most people walked right past it, especially at this hour. The evening rush had cleared out 40 minutes ago. The last scheduled bus had already pulled away from the curb. The plaza was almost empty now. Just a few stragglers heading toward the parking garage, and a hot dog cart packing up for the night. The woman looked about 70, maybe older. She wore a long wool coat that had probably been expensive once, buttoned all the way up to her neck. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, and her posture was straight, almost proud, even though she was sitting perfectly still with her hands folded in her lap. She wasn't looking at her phone. She wasn't reading anything. She was just sitting there, staring at the empty bus lane, like she was waiting for something that had already left without her. Chloe almost kept walking. She was tired. She was broke. She had her own problems stacked up like the dishes in her sink she hadn't gotten around to washing since Sunday. But something about the way the old woman sat there, calm on the outside, completely alone on the inside, made Chloe's feet stop. "Ma'am?" Chloe walked closer, her work boots scuffing the concrete. "You okay?" "The last bus on this route already left about 20 minutes ago." The woman looked up. Her eyes were sharp and clear, the kind of eyes that had seen decades of things most people couldn't even guess at. She studied Chloe's face for a moment, then offered a small, tired smile. "I know, dear. I was running late from my evening walk and missed it by 2 minutes." She let out a quiet breath. "And I seem to have left my purse sitting on my kitchen counter like a fool. No phone, no money, no bus card. You don't have anyone you can call?" "I do, but they're all the way across town, and the house phone is the only number I remember by heart." She laughed softly at herself. "That's what happens when you let machines remember everything for you." Chloe looked around the plaza. The hot dog cart vendor was already folding down his umbrella. The parking garage across the street was dimming its lights. In another 15 minutes, this plaza was going to be completely dark and completely empty, and this woman was going to be sitting right here in the cold with no way to get home. $11.37. That was grocery money. That was the difference between eating toast for the next 3 days or eating nothing at all. Chloe pulled the money out of her pocket. "Stay right here," she said. "Give me 2 minutes." She jogged across the plaza toward the food cart before the vendor could finish packing up. The guy behind the counter, mid-50s, thick mustache, tired eyes that mirrored her own, was already pulling the shutters down. "Hey, wait, please." Chloe was slightly out of breath. "Can I still get something? A bread bowl? And a tea?" He looked at her uniform, then at the bills in her hand, then sighed, and pushed the shutter back up. Sourdough bread bowl, $3.50. Tea, $2. You want anything else? That's it? Actually, make it 2 teas. He rang it up. $7.50 total. Chloe handed over $8 and dropped the 50 cents change back into her pocket. She now had $3.87 to last until Friday. She carried the food back to the bench in a small paper bag, the 2 cups of tea warming her frozen fingers through the thin cardboard. Here, Chloe sat down next to the woman and handed her the bread bowl and a cup. It's sourdough, still hot. The woman looked at the bread, then at Chloe, and something shifted in her expression. It was subtle, just a softening around her eyes, a slight parting of her lips, like she wanted to say something, but the words got caught somewhere deep in her chest. "Sweetheart, you didn't have to do that. I know." Chloe tore off a piece of her own bread and blew on her tea. "But it's cold, and you're stuck here, and bread tastes better when you eat it with someone anyway." They ate together on that bench in the November cold, 2 strangers sharing a $5 meal under a broken plaza light. The old woman said her name was Evelyn. Chloe told her about her cleaning shifts at the terminal and how the floor near Gate 7 was always the worst because people spilled coffee there like it was some kind of tradition. Evelyn laughed, a real laugh, full and warm, the kind that made Chloe feel like maybe this miserable Tuesday night wasn't so miserable after all. They talked for almost 40 minutes. About bread, about Chicago winters, about how the city looked different at night when most people weren't paying attention. Evelyn listened more than she talked, and when she did speak, every word carried a quiet weight, like someone who was used to people hanging on her sentences. When a black sedan pulled up to the curb at exactly 10 o'clock, Evelyn stood and straightened her coat. "That's my ride, dear. My son must have sent someone when I didn't come home on time." She reached over and squeezed Chloe's hand. "Thank you, for the bread and for sitting with me. You have no idea how much that meant." Chloe smiled. "Get home safe, Evelyn." She watched the old woman walk to the sedan. The rear door opened from inside, and Evelyn climbed in without looking back. The car pulled away smoothly, its tinted windows giving nothing away. Chloe sat on the bench for another minute, finishing the last of her cold tea, feeling oddly content for someone with $3.87 to her name. She didn't notice the second car, parked 30 yards down the street, tucked between a delivery van and a fire hydrant. An unmarked gray sedan sat with its engine idling. Inside, 2 men in dark suits watched the black car disappear around the corner, then turned their attention back to the woman still sitting on the bench. One of them raised a small camera and clicked twice, capturing Chloe's face under the dim plaza light. The other picked up a phone and dialed a single number. "We've got a new contact on the mother. Young woman, mid-20s, maintenance uniform, bought her food and sat with her for over 30 minutes. No, I don't recognize her. Could be nothing. Could be a setup. We'll send the photos up tonight." The line went dead. The sedan's headlights stayed off as it pulled away from the curb and vanished into the Chicago night. Chloe tossed her empty teacup into the trash, slung her bag over her shoulder, and walked toward the bus stop on the next block. She had no idea that a simple loaf of bread had just put her face on the desk of one of the most powerful men in the city. 2 days later, Chloe found herself standing inside Mariano's Corner Bakery on Wabash Avenue at 7 in the morning, staring at the bread shelf like she was making the most important decision of her life. Sourdough felt too predictable. Wheat was boring. The pumpernickel looked dense enough to use as a doorstop. She picked up the seeded rye. It was warm, freshly baked, and when she held it close, the crust smelled like caraway and something faintly sweet underneath. $4.25. She had exactly $9 left from yesterday's tip jar at the office park, which meant this loaf was going to cost her almost half of what she had until payday. She bought it anyway. The thing was, Chloe couldn't stop thinking about Tuesday night. About Evelyn sitting on that bench, dignified and alone, not complaining, not asking for help, just quietly stuck. Most people would have flagged down a stranger or banged on the terminal doors. Evelyn had just sat there, with her hands folded, waiting, like she trusted that the world would eventually send her something good. And for some reason, the world had sent Chloe Miller and a $5 bread bowl. Evelyn had mentioned during their conversation that she walked through the plaza every other evening around 7:30, a habit she'd kept for years because her doctor told her the fresh air was good for her circulation. So Chloe figured she'd keep a fresh loaf handy in her locker at the terminal, and if she spotted Evelyn again on her route, she'd have something warm to offer her. It was a small thing, the kind of thing that costs you money you don't have and earns you nothing in return. But Chloe had grown up watching her grandmother do exactly this. Split whatever little she had with whoever needed it more. Some lessons don't come with explanations. They just settle into your bones and stay there. She tucked the rye bread into her backpack, zipped it shut, and headed for the bus. 14 miles north, on the 32nd floor of a glass tower that didn't have its name on the front door, a different kind of morning was already underway. Blake Sterling sat behind a steel desk in a windowless room lined with 6 monitors, each one cycling through camera feeds from locations scattered across the city. Parking garages, warehouse entrances, restaurant back doors, building lobbies. Every feed was sharp, time-stamped, and archived on encrypted servers that only 3 people in the entire organization had access to. Blake was 51, built like a retired linebacker who never actually retired from anything, and had the kind of face that looked like it had been carved out of a bad mood. He'd spent 18 years running security for the Vance family, and in those 18 years, he had learned one fundamental truth about his job. The threats you see coming are never the ones that hurt you. It's the ones that look harmless, the ones that smile, the ones that show up with bread and tea on a cold night and sit on a bench for 40 minutes making an old woman laugh. Those are the ones that keep you up at night. He clicked the mouse twice and pulled up the footage from Tuesday evening. Plaza camera, east angle. The timestamp read 9:22 p.m. There she was. Young woman, heavy build, gray maintenance uniform, work boots, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She crossed the plaza, stopped near the bench, spoke to Mrs. Vance for about a minute, then jogged to the food cart and came back with a bag and 2 cups. Blake watched the entire 40-minute interaction at double speed. The woman's body language was relaxed, open. She leaned back on the bench, gestured with her hands when she talked, laughed a few times. She didn't look around, didn't check her phone, didn't glance toward the street or scan the parked cars. She looked, by every visual metric Blake had trained himself to read over 2 decades, completely ordinary. And that's exactly what bothered him. 3 rival operations had made moves on Vance interests in the past year alone. 2 of them had used low-level employees as entry points. Drivers, cleaners, delivery workers. People nobody looks at twice. People who can get close to a target without triggering a single alarm because they blend into the background like wallpaper. A janitor buying bread for the boss's mother on a dark plaza bench? That was either the most innocent thing Blake had seen all year or the most carefully designed first contact he'd ever encountered. He picked up his desk phone and dialed a 4-digit internal extension. "I need a full background pull on a woman." He read from the notes his field team had sent up Tuesday night. Chloe Miller, mid-20s. Works maintenance at Metro Transit Terminal, possibly a second job somewhere else. I want employment history, financial records, known associates, social media, residential address, Everything. And I want it clean. No flags, no contact. Nothing that tells her someone's looking. The voice on the other end confirmed and hung up. Blake leaned back in his chair and stared at the frozen frame on his center monitor. Chloe Miller, sitting on a bench, tearing bread with her fingers, handing half of it to a woman whose last name she probably didn't even know. In Blake's world, kindness without a motive was the rarest thing on earth, and rare things made him nervous. He saved the footage to a priority folder, tagged it with a red flag, and typed a 2-line summary into the daily briefing that would land on Garrett Vance's desk by noon. New unidentified contact with Mrs. Vance. Terminal Plaza, November 5th. Engagement appeared casual and friendly. Full vetting in progress. Recommend elevated surveillance until cleared. He hit send and turned back to his monitors. Somewhere across town, Chloe Miller was riding a city bus with a loaf of rye bread in her backpack, thinking about nothing more complicated than whether Evelyn preferred butter or olive oil. The gap between those two worlds was about to get very small, very fast. The file on Chloe Miller was 46 pages long, and Garrett Vance read every single one of them. He sat alone in his corner office on the 38th floor of Vance Holdings, jacket off, sleeves rolled to his elbows, the manila folder spread open across his desk like a patient on an operating table. Late afternoon sun cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, throwing long orange streaks across the polished wood surface. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago. He hadn't noticed. Garrett was 28, but people who met him for the first time usually guessed 35. It wasn't his face. He had his mother's sharp jawline and his father's dark eyes, a combination that most people found hard to read. It was the way he carried himself, measured, deliberate, like every word he spoke and every step he took had been calculated 3 moves ahead. Running a billion-dollar enterprise that operated in the gray spaces between legitimate business and something much more complicated will age you faster than any clock. He'd inherited the Vance operation at 23 when his father died of a heart attack at his own dinner table. No warning, no transition plan, no final lessons whispered from a hospital bed. Just a Thursday evening, a plate of pasta, and then silence. Garrett had walked into the boardroom the following Monday, wearing his father's watch, and told 14 senior executives, most of them twice his age, that nothing was going to change, except the name on the door. 5 years later, he'd kept that promise. The Vance operation ran tighter, cleaner, and more profitable than it ever had under his father. Garrett had expanded into commercial real estate, logistics, and infrastructure contracts across 3 states. He'd also quietly dismantled 2 rival organizations that had tried to exploit the leadership transition, absorbing their assets so efficiently that most of the city's power players didn't even realize it had happened until it was already over. But for all of that, the money, the reach, the rooms full of people who stood up when he walked in, there was exactly one thing in Garrett Vance's life that he considered untouchable: his mother. Evelyn Vance was the only person on earth who still called him sweetheart, and meant it. She was the only person who could walk into his office unannounced and tell him his tie looked terrible, and he'd actually change it. She was 73 years old, stubbornly independent, and flatly refused to let security follow her on her evening walks, even though Garrett had asked her at least 200 times. So when Blake's briefing hit his desk 2 days ago, flagging a new unidentified contact near his mother, Garrett had done what he always did. He ordered the full workup and waited for the facts before forming an opinion. Now the facts were here, and they told a very simple story. Chloe Ann Miller, born April 14th, 25 years ago, in Rockford, Illinois. Mother deceased, ovarian cancer, 8 years ago. Father unknown, no record. Raised primarily by a maternal grandmother, Dorothy Miller, who passed away 3 years ago from pneumonia. No siblings. No extended family of any significance. Education. Graduated from Rockford East High School with a 3.2 GPA. Completed 1 year of community college before dropping out due to financial hardship. No degree. Employment. Currently held 2 jobs. Night janitor at Metro Transit Terminal, employed for 14 months. Morning cleaning crew at Lakewood Office Park, employed for 9 months. Combined annual income, before taxes, just under $28,000. She worked roughly 60 hours a week across both positions. Residential address, a studio apartment on South Halsted, 450 square feet. Rent, $680 a month. Lease renewed twice. No missed payments, though the file noted that her checking account balance dipped below $100 at least once every pay cycle. Criminal record, completely clean. No arrests, no warrants, no traffic violations, no civil suits. Not even a parking ticket. Known associates, a short list. 2 co-workers at the transit terminal. A former neighbor from Rockford she exchanged occasional text messages with. A library card she used regularly at the Herald Washington branch downtown. That was it. Affiliations with rival organizations, political groups, or any entity that had ever crossed paths with Vance Holdings. 0. Absolute 0. Garrett closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. He thought about what Blake had suggested in the briefing, that the encounter could be a carefully staged first contact, designed to build trust with Evelyn and eventually extract information. It was a reasonable theory. Blake was paid to think that way, and he was good at his job. But Garrett had been reading people since he was old enough to sit at his father's dinner table and watch grown men try to lie with straight faces. And everything in this file pointed to the same conclusion. Chloe Miller wasn't an operative. She wasn't a plant. She wasn't working an angle. She was a 25-year-old woman who worked herself to the bone 60 hours a week, lived alone in a tiny apartment, had almost no one left in the world, and had spent her last few dollars buying bread and tea for a stranger on a cold bench because it was the right thing to do. Garrett picked up his phone and called Blake directly. "I've read the Miller file." "And?" Blake's voice was flat, expectant. "She's clean. Completely clean. Pull the surveillance back to standard proximity on my mother. No direct monitoring on Miller. She's not a threat." There was a pause on the other end. "Garrett, with respect, the approach pattern fits a... I read the same approach pattern analysis you did, Blake. I also read that this woman has $3 in her bank account and gave away her dinner money to a 73-year-old woman she'd never met. That's not an approach pattern, that's just a good person." Blake went quiet for a moment. "Understood. I'll scale it back. But I'd like to keep passive awareness on the terminal plaza during Mrs. Vance's walking hours, just as standard protocol." "That's fine. One more thing." Garrett stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city below. "Find out more about her work situation. Both jobs. Who manages the terminal contract, what she's getting paid, what the conditions are like. Keep it quiet. I just want to know." "May I ask why?" Garrett watched the late afternoon traffic crawl along Michigan Avenue, thousands of people heading home to warm apartments and full refrigerators, and thought about a woman sitting on a cold bench splitting a loaf of bread in half because she believed that was what you're supposed to do with whatever little you have. "Because someone should be paying attention to her," he said. "And right now, it looks like nobody is." He hung up, set the folder aside, and opened his laptop. Somewhere between reading page 12 and page 38 of Chloe Miller's entire life reduced to paper, something had shifted in his thinking. He wasn't sure what to call it yet. Respect, maybe, or recognition. The understanding that the kind of character described in that file, quiet, stubborn, generous in the face of having almost nothing, was the rarest thing he encountered in his world. Garrett Vance had built his empire by knowing exactly who people were and what they wanted. Chloe Miller wanted nothing, and somehow that made her the most interesting person who had crossed his desk in years. The notice was taped to the break room door when Chloe arrived for her Tuesday night shift. White paper, black ink, no signature at the bottom. Just a company letterhead she didn't recognize. Apex Facility Solutions, and 3 short paragraphs that hit like a gut punch. Effective immediately, all maintenance staff shifts at Metro Transit Terminal will be reduced from 6 hours to 4 hours per night. Hourly compensation rates are under review, pending new management evaluation. All current pay disbursements are temporarily frozen until the transition audit is complete. Chloe read it twice, then a third time, because her brain refused to accept what her eyes were seeing. Pay frozen, hours slashed, and not a single person from management had bothered to tell them face to face. She pushed through the break room door and found 3 of her co-workers already inside. Danny Reeves, the older guy who handled the East Wing, was sitting on the edge of the table with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. Maria Souza, who cleaned the restrooms and ticket counters, was leaning against the vending machine with her phone pressed to her ear, speaking rapid Portuguese to someone who sounded equally upset. And Terrence, quiet, reliable Terrence, who never complained about anything, was standing by the window, staring at his own copy of the notice, like it had personally insulted his family. "When did this go up?" Chloe asked. "Sometime this afternoon," Danny said. "Nobody told us anything. I called the old supervisor's number, and it's disconnected. Whatever this Apex outfit is, they moved in fast." "Who are they?" "Some private contractor. Word is a guy named Russell Hayes bought out the terminal's maintenance contract last week. The whole thing. Cleaning, waste management, equipment upkeep, all of it. He's been doing this across the city, buying up facility contracts, gutting the staff, bringing in his own cheaper crews once the original workers quit." Chloe leaned against the doorframe. "So he cuts our hours and freezes our pay until we get frustrated and leave on our own. That's the playbook." Danny rubbed his face with both hands. "I've seen it before at the convention center downtown. Same company, same moves. Hayes squeezes out the existing crew, waits 30 days, then replaces everyone with part-timers, at minimum wage. No benefits, no overtime, no job security." Maria hung up her phone and turned around. "My husband says I should just find something else. But I've been here 3 years. 3 years, and they can just tape a piece of paper to a door and erase everything?" Nobody answered her. There wasn't a good answer to give. Chloe stared at the notice one more time, did the math in her head, and felt the number land on her chest like a brick. 4 hours instead of 6 meant roughly $400 less per month. Her rent was $680. Her bus pass was $105. Groceries, phone bill, electricity, she was already stretching every dollar until it screamed. Losing $400 would put her underwater within 2 weeks. She could pick up extra shifts at the office park, maybe, if they had any. She could look for a third job, but she was already running on 5 hours of sleep, and her body was starting to remind her of that fact every single morning when her knees cracked loud enough to wake the neighbors. For about 10 seconds, standing in that fluorescent-lit break room with the vending machine humming and her co-workers' faces gray with worry, Chloe considered quitting, just walking out, leaving the mop in the bucket, taking the bus home, and figuring out the rest tomorrow. Then she thought about Evelyn, about sitting on that bench and tearing bread together in the cold, about her grandmother, who had cleaned office buildings for 31 years without ever once walking off a shift, even when the work was thankless and the money was short. Dorothy Miller used to say that the people who show up when things get hard are the only people who matter. Chloe pulled her hair back, tied it up, and grabbed her supply cart from the hallway. "I'm finishing my shift," she said. Danny looked at her. "They're paying us for 4 hours, Chloe. Then I'll work 4 hours, but I'm finishing them. She wheeled the cart out into the main concourse and started mopping. Gate 7 first, because that's where the coffee stains were always the worst, and because some things in life you can't control, but a clean floor isn't one of them. She worked her 4 hours. She did them properly. Every tile, every trash can, every smudged window in her section. When the clock hit 1 in the morning, she clocked out, packed up, and walked to the bus stop, with her shoulders aching and her bank account doing math she didn't want to think about. What Chloe didn't know was that her shift hadn't gone unobserved. 2 floors above the main concourse, in a small utility office that had been quietly repurposed 6 days ago, a man in a plain gray jacket sat behind a laptop connected to the terminal's internal camera feeds. He wasn't security. He wasn't management. His name was Cole, and he'd been placed at the terminal by Blake Sterling's team to monitor the maintenance wing for anything connected to the Hayes contract situation. Cole had watched the whole evening unfold. The notice on the door, the break room conversation, the defeated faces. And then Chloe Miller pulling her cart out and going to work anyway, alone, mopping a floor that a company run by a man she'd never met was trying to make her abandon. He typed a short encrypted message and sent it to the operations hub at Vance Holdings. Hayes has initiated Phase 1 at Metro Transit. Staff hours cut, pay frozen, no formal notification to workers. Existing crew is demoralized. 1 employee, Miller C., completed full shift despite reduced terms. Hayes's strategy appears consistent with prior hostile acquisitions at Convention Center and Lakewood. Recommend executive review. The message arrived on Blake Sterling's desk at 1:47 in the morning. Blake read it, flagged it, and forwarded it directly to Garrett Vance's private inbox with a single note attached. You asked me to watch her work situation. It just got complicated. Garrett read it at 6 in the morning with his first cup of coffee. He set the cup down, picked up his phone, and called his acquisitions team. I need everything you can find on a company called Apex Facility Solutions and a man named Russell Hayes. Financials, contracts, outstanding debts, pending litigation, all of it, and I need it by Thursday. The invitation came on a Thursday morning, tucked inside a cream-colored envelope that Chloe found slipped under the staff entrance door at the transit terminal. No stamp, no return address. Just her name, written across the front, in neat, slightly old-fashioned handwriting that Chloe recognized immediately. Dear Chloe, I've been thinking about our evening on the bench and how lovely it was to share a meal with someone who actually listens. My doctor has ordered me to socialize more, his words, as if I'm a houseplant that needs sunlight. And I would be delighted if you'd join me for lunch this Saturday at my home. Nothing fancy, just soup, good bread, and better conversation. A car will be at the Terminal Plaza at noon, if you're willing. Please say yes. Warmly, Evelyn Chloe read the note 3 times, smiling wider with each pass. She had Saturday off from both jobs, a rare alignment of schedules that happened maybe twice a month. And she'd been planning to spend it doing laundry and reorganizing the kitchen shelf that had been slowly collapsing since September. Soup with Evelyn sounded significantly better than fighting with a broken shelf bracket. She said yes. The car that arrived at the plaza Saturday at noon was the same black sedan from the night on the bench. The driver, a polite man in his 40s, who introduced himself as Martin, opened the rear door for her and said almost nothing during the 30-minute ride north. Chloe watched the city thin out through the tinted windows, the dense blocks of downtown giving way to wider streets, then tree-lined avenues, then long stretches of green space she'd only ever seen from the highway. When the car turned through a pair of stone gates and rolled up a private drive lined with mature oaks, Chloe sat up straighter and felt something shift in her stomach. The house at the end of the drive wasn't a house. It was an estate. 3 stories of pale stone and dark timber, wide symmetrical windows, ivy climbing the eastern wall in thick ropes. The front garden alone was larger than the entire apartment building Chloe lived in. A stone fountain sat in the center of the circular drive, water running quietly over its tiered edges. Chloe had cleaned buildings that looked like this. She had never been invited inside one. Martin parked near the front steps and opened her door. Chloe stepped out, suddenly aware of her second-hand jacket and her sneakers with the fraying laces. She tugged at the hem of her sweater and wished she'd worn something that hadn't been through the wash 40 times. The front door opened before she reached it, and Evelyn appeared in the doorway wearing a dark blue cardigan and a pair of reading glasses pushed up on her head. She looked warmer here, more relaxed, like the house had softened her edges. "You came," Evelyn said, and the way she said it, with genuine surprise and something close to relief, made Chloe realize that maybe this woman was lonelier than she let on. "You promised soup," Chloe said. "I don't turn down soup." Evelyn laughed and took her arm, guiding her through the house and out a set of glass doors into the rear courtyard garden. The space was stunning. Trimmed hedges, stone pathways, a pergola draped in late autumn clematis. A round table had been set under the pergola with white linen, 2 bowls of butternut squash soup, a basket of crusty bread, and a small glass pitcher of water with lemon slices floating on top. They sat, they ate, and they talked like 2 people who had known each other far longer than a week and a half. Evelyn asked about Chloe's grandmother, and Chloe told her about Dorothy Miller, how she'd raised Chloe alone after her mother died, how she'd worked cleaning jobs her entire life and never once complained about it, how she used to say that hard work was just love in comfortable shoes. Evelyn listened with her spoon resting on the edge of her bowl and her eyes fixed on Chloe's face, with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. "Your grandmother sounds like she was remarkable," Evelyn said quietly. "She was everything," Chloe said. "I miss her every day. Sometimes I catch myself saving little things to tell her before I remember she's not there anymore." Evelyn reached across the table and placed her hand over Chloe's. Her fingers were thin and cool, and the gesture was so gentle that Chloe had to blink hard to keep her composure. "I lost my husband 5 years ago," Evelyn said. "Same thing. I still set 2 coffee cups out in the morning sometimes." She smiled. "The grief never goes away, sweetheart. It just learns to sit quietly." They stayed at the table for 2 hours. Evelyn talked about her son Garrett. Carefully, Chloe noticed. Always in measured terms. He ran a large corporate firm, commercial real estate and logistics. Very successful, very busy, often traveling. She described him the way a proud mother would describe any accomplished son, and nothing in her tone suggested anything beyond a family doing well in the business world. Chloe shared stories about the terminal, about Danny and Maria and the regulars who passed through every night. She talked about the situation with the new contractor cutting hours, keeping her tone light, even though the stress of it had been sitting on her shoulders all week. "That's terrible," Evelyn said, her eyes narrowing. "Someone buys a contract and just discards the people, like they're disposable?" "It happens more than you'd think," Chloe said. "But we'll figure it out. We always do." Evelyn studied her for a long moment, and something moved behind her expression, a thought forming, a connection being drawn, that she kept entirely to herself. 30 feet above them, on the second-floor terrace overlooking the courtyard, Garrett Vance stood behind the stone railing with a glass of water in his hand. He had canceled a 2 o'clock meeting to be here, telling his assistant it was a personal matter. He'd positioned himself far enough back that neither woman at the table could see him, but close enough that he could hear fragments of conversation drifting up through the garden air. He heard Chloe talk about her grandmother. He heard her laugh when Evelyn spilled soup on the tablecloth and tried to cover it with a bread plate. He watched the way she sat with his mother, leaning in, unhurried, giving her full attention like Evelyn was the most important person in the world. Garrett had grown up surrounded by people who performed kindness when they wanted something, business partners who sent flowers before asking for favors, associates who visited his mother with gifts wrapped around hidden agendas. He could spot manufactured warmth from across a room, and he'd built his career on the ability to tell the difference between people who cared and people who calculated. Chloe Miller wasn't calculating anything. She was just sitting in a garden eating soup with a lonely woman because she'd been asked and she'd said yes. Garrett finished his water, set the glass on the railing, and went back inside. He picked up his phone and opened the message thread with his acquisitions team. "How's the Hayes file coming?" The reply came back in under a minute, almost complete. "This guy's in deeper than we thought. You're going to want to see this." Russell Hayes liked doing business in places that made people uncomfortable. The Harbor District commercial docks at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night was exactly that kind of place. Cold wind off Lake Michigan, the groan of cargo cranes sitting idle, sodium lights casting everything in a sick yellow glow that made even the concrete look tired. The kind of location where conversations happened that nobody was supposed to remember afterward. Hayes stood beside his silver SUV near Dock 14, flanked by two attorneys in overcoats who carried matching leather briefcases and matching expressions of practiced indifference. He was 44, lean, clean-shaven, and wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most of his employees made in a month. Everything about him was precise: his posture, his cufflinks, the way he positioned himself slightly elevated on the loading ramp so he could look down at whoever he was talking to. The man he was talking to tonight was Frank Petrie, head facility supervisor for the Metro Transit Terminal, who looked like he hadn't slept in 4 days. "Let me simplify this for you, Frank." Hayes spoke the way a surgeon handles a scalpel, calm, controlled, designed to cut cleanly. "You sign the transfer authorization tonight. I absorb the remaining maintenance obligations under Apex, and your department is out from under a contract you can't afford to fulfill anyway." Clean break. Everybody walks away. Frank shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He was 56, had managed the terminal's facility operations for 11 years, and until 2 weeks ago had never heard the name Russell Hayes. Now that name was attached to every problem in his professional life. "And if I don't sign?" Hayes tilted his head, a gesture that was probably meant to look thoughtful but came across as a predator adjusting its angle. "Then Apex files a breach of contract claim against the Transit Authority Monday morning. My legal team has documented 17 violations of the service agreement your staff has failed to meet since we took over scheduling. Reduced coverage hours, incomplete sanitation reports, missed equipment inspections. All verifiable, all actionable. Those violations only exist because you cut our hours and froze our pay," Frank said, and his voice cracked slightly on the last word. "You created the gaps, then documented them. That's not oversight. That's a setup. That's business." Hayes straightened his cufflinks, and in about 72 hours, it's going to become very expensive business for anyone whose name is still attached to the old contract. "I'm offering you a door, Frank. I suggest you walk through it." Frank stared at the documents one of the attorneys was holding out toward him. His hand was halfway to his jacket pocket, reaching for a pen he didn't want to use, when headlights swept across the dock. 3 black vehicles pulled into the loading area in a slow, deliberate formation. They parked in a wide arc facing the SUV, engines running, headlights on. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the rear door of the center vehicle opened, and Garrett Vance stepped out. He wore a dark navy overcoat over a white shirt with no tie. His shoes were polished but practical. The kind of shoes a man wears when he expects to walk across rough ground and doesn't care about getting them dirty. Behind him, 4 members of his executive team exited the flanking vehicles, 2 financial officers and 2 corporate attorneys carrying their own briefcases, though theirs were noticeably thicker. Hayes watched them approach, and, for the first time all evening, his jaw tightened. He knew the name. Everyone in Chicago's commercial real estate circles knew the name. Vance Holdings controlled more square footage in this city than any 3 competitors combined. They operated in logistics, infrastructure, property management, and a dozen other sectors that Hayes had spent years trying to muscle his way into. Garrett stopped 6 feet from Hayes and offered no handshake, no greeting, no smile. "Mr. Hayes, my name is Garrett Vance. I think you and I need to have a conversation about your business model." Hayes recovered quickly. He was good at that. "I don't believe we have any overlapping interests, Mr. Vance." "We didn't. Until you started squeezing workers out of a transit terminal my company has a vested interest in." Garrett nodded to one of his financial officers, who stepped forward and opened a leather folio. "Over the past 72 hours, my team has completed a full audit of Apex Facility Solutions. Your company currently holds 11 municipal service contracts across the greater Chicago area, all acquired through the same pattern: hostile underbidding, followed by staff reduction, followed by breach of contract pressure on existing supervisors." Hayes said nothing. His attorneys shifted slightly. "Recalibrating," Garrett continued. "Your operating capital is leveraged against a credit line from Midwest Commercial Lending, which is itself secured by your equity stake in 4 commercial properties on the south side. Combined outstanding debt across all instruments, approximately $6.3 million. The number hung in the cold air like a held breath. "As of 9 o'clock this evening," Garrett said, "Vance Holdings has purchased the full outstanding balance of that debt from Midwest Commercial Lending. Every dollar. We now own your financial obligations, Mr. Hayes. All of them." Hayes blinked. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, but Garrett caught it. The first crack. "That means your credit line is now subject to our terms," Garrett said, "and our terms are straightforward. You will release all 11 municipal service contracts you currently hold, including Metro Transit. You will restore all original employment terms for every worker affected by your acquisitions. You will do this within 5 business days, and you will do it quietly." "And if I don't?" Hayes asked, though his voice had lost about half its earlier edge. "Then we call the full balance due immediately. $6.3 million, payable in 30 days, and based on what my team found in your financials, you don't have it." Garrett paused. "You built your operation on debt, Mr. Hayes. The problem with building on debt is that someone can always buy the foundation out from under you." The silence that followed lasted about 15 seconds. Hayes looked at his attorneys. They looked at each other. One of them gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Hayes turned back to Garrett, and something in his face had changed. The sharp confidence, the surgical precision, the predatory tilt, all of it had flattened into something much simpler. A man doing math in his head and arriving at an answer he didn't like. 5 business days, Hayes said quietly. 5 business days, Garrett confirmed. He turned to Frank Petrie, who had been standing motionless through the entire exchange. "Mr. Petrie, you can put your pen away. You won't be signing anything tonight." Frank exhaled for what felt like the first time in 10 minutes. Garrett walked back to his vehicle without looking at Hayes again. His team followed. The 3 black cars pulled out of the dock in the same deliberate formation, headlights cutting through the harbor fog as they turned onto the access road. Inside the center car, Garrett sat in the back seat and loosened the top button of his shirt. His chief financial officer, seated across from him, let out a low whistle. $6.3 million to make a point. Your father would have called that expensive charity. Garrett looked out the window at the harbor lights reflecting on the dark water. My father never met Chloe Miller. Chloe almost didn't go to work that evening. She'd spent the last 3 days running numbers in her head, and every version came out the same shade of red. 4-hour shifts at the terminal meant roughly $700 a month, instead of the $1,100 she'd been scraping by on. Her office park job covered another $900, total $1,600. Rent, utilities, bus pass, phone, and food added up to at least $1,750 on a lean month. That left her $150 short every 30 days, which meant she had about 6 weeks before the math caught up to her completely. She'd already skipped lunch twice this week to save money. She'd canceled her library hold on a novel she'd been waiting 3 months to read because the late fee from last time was still sitting unpaid. She'd even considered selling her grandmother's silver bracelet, the one Dorothy had worn every day for 40 years, before the thought made her physically sick, and she shoved it back in the dresser drawer and closed it hard. Thursday evening, 6:45. Chloe stood in her studio apartment in jeans and a clean t-shirt, staring at her maintenance uniform hanging on the back of the bathroom door, trying to find a reason to put it on. The reason, as usual, was simple. It was the only option she had. She got dressed, packed her bag, and caught the 7:15 bus to Metro Transit. The terminal looked the same from the outside, wide glass facade, fluorescent glow spilling onto the sidewalk, the usual stream of commuters thinning out as the evening rush wound down. Chloe badged in through the staff entrance and walked the familiar hallway toward the maintenance office, her boots echoing on the tile she'd mopped 1,000 times. She noticed the first difference before she reached the break room. The notice was gone. The white paper with the Apex letterhead that had been taped to the break room door for the past week, the one announcing reduced hours and frozen pay, had been removed. In its place was a new sheet of paper, printed on heavier stock, with a different logo at the top. Vance Property Management, a subsidiary of Vance Holdings. Chloe had never heard of either name. She read the notice standing in the hallway with her bag still over her shoulder. To all Metro Transit Terminal maintenance staff, effective immediately, Vance Property Management has assumed full operational control of all facility services at Metro Transit Terminal. All previous scheduling changes implemented under the prior contractor have been reversed. Original shift hours are restored in full, effective tonight. Additionally, all compensation withheld during the transition period will be reimbursed in full within 5 business days. A one-time adjustment bonus equivalent to 2 weeks standard pay will be included to account for financial disruption experienced during the contractor changeover. Vance Property Management is committed to fair working conditions, competitive compensation, and long-term employment stability for all facility staff. Updated employment packets with revised terms, improved benefits, and new scheduling options will be distributed by end of week. We value your work and your dedication. Thank you for your continued service. Chloe read it again, then one more time, slower, because individual phrases kept snagging in her brain, and she needed to make sure she wasn't hallucinating. Original shifts restored, back pay reimbursed, 2-week bonus, improved benefits. She pushed through the break room door and found Danny Reeves sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and an expression she'd never seen on his face before. He looked stunned, like someone had told him a joke, and he was still waiting for the punchline. "You saw it?" he said. "I saw it. Is it real?" Maria called the new management office an hour ago, talked to an actual human being who confirmed everything. Full hours tonight, paychecks released by Monday, bonus included. Danny shook his head slowly. "I've been doing this job for 9 years, Chloe. I've seen contracts change hands a dozen times. Nobody, and I mean nobody, has ever bought out a contract and the first thing they did was give the cleaning crew a raise. Who are they? Vance Property Management? Big outfit, apparently. Part of some holding company that runs commercial real estate all over the Midwest. I looked them up on my phone. They own office towers, shopping centers, logistics facilities, the kind of company that has a lobby with a waterfall in it. Danny took a sip of his coffee. Why a company like that would care about a maintenance crew at a transit terminal, I have absolutely no idea. Chloe leaned against the counter and let the information settle. The tightness that had been living in her chest for the past week, the low, constant pressure of knowing the numbers didn't work, loosened by a fraction, then another fraction, then enough that she could take a full breath without her ribs feeling like they were arguing with each other. Full shifts. Back pay. A bonus. She wasn't going to lose her apartment. She wasn't going to have to sell the bracelet. She could buy groceries this weekend without counting every item twice before putting it in the basket. Terrence arrived at 7:30 and read the notice 3 times, same as Chloe. Maria came in at 8, burst into tears in the hallway, and then immediately apologized for crying, which made Danny start laughing, which made Chloe start laughing, and for about 5 minutes, the break room sounded like a place where people actually wanted to be. Chloe worked her full 6-hour shift that night. Every tile, every trash can, every smudged window. Gate 7 first, as always. The coffee stains were particularly stubborn tonight, like they'd been marinating in the grout for emphasis, and she scrubbed them with the kind of energy that only comes from unexpected relief. At 1 in the morning, she clocked out, zipped up her jacket, and walked through the plaza toward her bus stop. The air was cold, the sky was clear, and the bench where she'd met Evelyn 2 weeks ago sat empty under the same broken light. Chloe stopped beside it for a moment. She ran her hand along the back of the bench, feeling the cold metal under her fingers, and thought about bread and tea, and a conversation that had started everything she didn't yet understand. Somewhere out there, a company she'd never heard of had just changed her life. And she had no idea why. She caught the 1:15 bus home, sat in the back row by the window, and fell asleep with her head against the glass before the bus reached the second stop. For the first time in weeks, she slept without dreaming about numbers. 3 days later, Chloe sat across from Evelyn at a small outdoor cafe on Michigan Avenue, watching the older woman stir honey into her tea with the focus of someone performing surgery. "Too much and it's syrup," Evelyn said, tapping the spoon twice on the rim. "Too little, and what's the point? Honey in tea is a commitment. Chloe, you have to mean it." Chloe laughed. She'd been doing that more in the past 2 weeks than she had in the past 6 months, and she was starting to suspect Evelyn was the reason. There was something about the woman's company that made the world feel less heavy, like sitting with her created a small pocket of air where the usual weight of bills and bus schedules and sore knees couldn't reach. They'd been meeting regularly now. A phone call here, a short walk through the plaza there. Evelyn had given Chloe her home number after the lunch at the estate, written on the back of a recipe card for butternut squash soup, and Chloe had called her twice that week, just to talk. The conversations were never about anything urgent. Bread recipes, the weather, a book Evelyn was reading about the history of Chicago architecture that she kept threatening to lend Chloe, even though it was 800 pages long. It felt, in a way Chloe hadn't experienced since her grandmother died, like having family again. The cafe was a narrow place, wedged between a law office and a dry cleaner, with 4 round tables on the sidewalk and a green awning that flapped in the November wind. Chloe had ordered a plain coffee because old habits die hard, and Evelyn had ordered chamomile tea and a slice of lemon cake that she'd barely touched. "You look better," Evelyn said, studying Chloe over the rim of her cup. "The last time I saw you, you had circles under your eyes dark enough to file a missing persons report. Things got a little easier at work." Chloe wrapped both hands around her mug. The terminal got bought out by a new management company, restored all our hours, paid us everything the old contractor held back, even threw in a bonus. It happened out of nowhere. Out of nowhere, Evelyn repeated, and something in her tone was just slightly off, a half-beat too knowing, a shade too calm, like someone hearing a story they'd already read the ending to. Chloe didn't catch it. She was too busy feeling grateful. "I keep thinking there has to be a catch," Chloe said. "Companies that size don't buy transit maintenance contracts and then immediately make things better for the janitors. That's not how it usually works. Maybe someone in that company has good judgment," Evelyn said simply. She set her teacup down and reached into the leather handbag beside her chair. "I have something for you." She placed a small velvet box on the table between them. It was dark blue, rectangular, and looked like it belonged in a jewelry store window rather than on a cafe table next to a half-eaten lemon cake. Chloe stared at it. "Evelyn, open it before you start arguing with me." Chloe picked up the box and lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a cushion of white silk, was a fountain pen. Silver, slender, with a fine brushed finish that caught the afternoon light and held it. The clip was engraved with a small vine pattern that wrapped around the cap in a single delicate line. It was, without question, the most beautiful object Chloe had ever held. "I can't accept this," Chloe said immediately. "You can, and you will." Evelyn's voice carried the particular firmness of a woman who had spent 73 years winning arguments by refusing to acknowledge that the argument was happening. "That pen belonged to my husband, Leonard. He carried it every day for 30 years, signed every important document of his life with it. He always said that a pen was a promise, that when you put your name on something, it should mean everything." Chloe ran her thumb along the barrel of the pen. It was warm from being in Evelyn's bag, and the weight of it felt deliberate, grounding, like holding something that carried decades of meaning in its metal. "Why are you giving this to me?" Chloe asked quietly. Evelyn leaned forward and folded her hands on the table. "Because 3 weeks ago, I was sitting alone on a bench in the cold, and a young woman I'd never met spent her last few dollars to make sure I had something to eat. Because that same young woman came back to the bakery 2 days later and bought a loaf of bread to keep in her locker in case she saw me again. Because in a city of 3 million people, you were the one who sat down." Chloe's throat tightened. She blinked and looked down at the pen, because looking at Evelyn's face right then was going to break something she was trying very hard to hold together. "My husband would have liked you," Evelyn said softly. "He always said you can learn everything you need to know about a person by watching what they do when nobody important is looking." Chloe closed the box carefully and held it in both hands on her lap. "Thank you, Evelyn. I mean that." Evelyn nodded, satisfied, and picked up her tea again. She took a long sip, set it down, and then spoke in a tone that was slightly more deliberate, like she was stepping from one room into another. "There's one more thing, dear. I've been keeping something from you, and I think it's time I stopped." Chloe looked up. "My son, Garrett. I told you he runs a corporate firm. That's true, but I left out a rather important detail." Evelyn paused. "The company that bought out your terminal contract, Vance Property Management. That's his company. Part of it, anyway. Vance Holdings. The whole operation belongs to my son." The cafe noise, the clinking cups, the traffic on Michigan Avenue, the awning snapping in the wind, all of it seemed to pull back for a moment, like the world had taken a half step away to give Chloe room to process what she'd just heard. "Your son bought our contract?" "He did. Because of me?" Evelyn smiled. The kind of smile that holds a dozen answers and only offers one. "Because of the bread, sweetheart. Because of a $5 loaf of bread and a cup of tea on a cold Tuesday night." Chloe opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. She looked at the pen in her lap, then at Evelyn, then at the pen again, and tried to connect the woman sitting across from her in a cardigan sipping chamomile to the kind of wealth and power that could buy out an entire company in a single evening. "Garrett would like to meet you," Evelyn continued, "properly, at his offices. He wants to thank you himself and discuss something he's been putting together for the past week." She reached across the table and squeezed Chloe's hand. "Will you come?" Chloe looked at this woman, this quiet, funny, warm woman who set 2 coffee cups out every morning for a husband who was gone and carried a dead man's fountain pen in her handbag, and realized that every assumption she'd made about Evelyn Vance had been both completely right and enormously incomplete at the same time. "Monday?" Chloe asked. Evelyn squeezed her hand tighter. "Monday." Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray Chicago sky that couldn't decide whether it wanted to rain or just threatened to rain all day. Chloe stood on the sidewalk outside the Vance Holdings Tower at 9:45, tilting her head back to look up at the building and immediately regretting it, because the thing seemed to go on forever. 42 floors of dark glass and steel, tapering slightly near the top, like the building was leaning forward to get a better look at the city below. The lobby entrance was framed by 2 massive stone pillars, and the revolving doors moved with the kind of silent precision that suggested even the doors in this building had a higher salary than she did. She'd changed outfits 3 times that morning. The first was too casual. The second made her look like she was attending a funeral. The third, dark slacks, a cream blouse she'd borrowed from Maria, and her cleanest pair of flat shoes, felt like the closest she could get to looking like she belonged in a building where the elevator buttons were probably worth more than her rent. The fountain pen was in her jacket pocket. She didn't know why she'd brought it. It just felt right to have it close. Chloe pushed through the revolving door and stepped into a lobby that made her stop walking for a full 3 seconds. White marble floors, so polished she could see her own reflection. A reception desk carved from a single piece of dark wood that stretched almost 20 feet across. Fresh flowers on every surface. White orchids, tall and elegant, arranged with the kind of effortless perfection that definitely required enormous effort. A young man in a fitted gray suit appeared at her side almost immediately, as if the building itself had sensed she needed directions. "Ms. Miller? That's me. Welcome to Vance Holdings. I'm Adrian, Mr. Vance's executive assistant. He's expecting you on the 38th floor. Right this way." Adrian led her across the lobby to a private elevator set apart from the main bank. He pressed a button with a keycard. The doors slid open without a sound, and Chloe stepped inside a space that smelled faintly of cedar and had better lighting than her entire apartment. The ride to the 38th floor took about 20 seconds. Chloe spent 18 of them staring at her reflection in the polished elevator wall, wondering what exactly a janitor from South Halsted was doing in a private elevator heading to the executive suite of a company that apparently owned half the commercial real estate in the Midwest. The doors opened onto a wide corridor with floor-to-ceiling windows along one side and framed architectural photographs along the other. Adrian walked her past 2 glass-walled conference rooms, an open lounge area with leather furniture and a coffee bar, and finally stopped at a set of double doors at the end of the hall. He knocked once, opened the right door, and stepped aside. "Miss Miller for you, sir." The office behind the doors was large enough to fit Chloe's studio apartment, inside it roughly 4 times. Wide windows wrapped around 2 walls, offering a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline that looked like something from a postcard. A long walnut desk sat near the far window, clean and organized, with a single laptop and a small framed photograph that Chloe couldn't quite see from the doorway. Garrett Vance stood up from behind the desk as she entered. He was younger than she'd expected. Evelyn had described him in terms that made Chloe picture someone older, more weathered, the kind of corporate executive who'd been grinding through boardrooms for decades. Garrett looked like he was barely 30, Dark eyes, strong build, wearing a charcoal suit with no tie, and the top button of his shirt open. His handshake, when he crossed the room to meet her, was firm and unhurried. "Chloe, thank you for coming. I've been looking forward to this. Thank you for inviting me." Chloe shook his hand and glanced around the office. "Your mother didn't mention the building was this intimidating." Garrett smiled, and it changed his whole face. Loosened it, made him look closer to his actual age. "My mother doesn't find anything intimidating. She once walked into a board meeting uninvited to tell me I was wearing the wrong tie, in front of 14 executives." Chloe laughed, and some of the tension she'd been carrying since the elevator dissolved. Garrett gestured to a sitting area near the windows. 2 leather chairs facing each other across a low glass table. A pot of tea and 2 cups had already been set out. They sat. Garrett poured tea for both of them, and Chloe noticed that his hands moved with the same deliberate care she'd seen in Evelyn. A family habit, maybe, the kind of thing you inherit without realizing it. "My mother told me she explained the connection between our company and the terminal contract," Garrett said. "She did. I'm still processing it, honestly." Garrett nodded. "I want to be straightforward with you, Chloe. 3 weeks ago, my security team flagged your interaction with my mother at the plaza. They thought you might be someone trying to get close to her for the wrong reasons. That's the world I operate in. People with hidden motives are a daily reality. So I ordered a background check on you." Chloe's eyebrows lifted slightly, but she didn't look away. "What came back," Garrett continued, "was a profile of someone who works 60 hours a week at 2 jobs, lives alone, has almost nothing in the bank, and spent her last dollars buying dinner for a woman she'd never met." He paused. "I've sat across from hundreds of people in this office, business partners, investors, competitors. I can count on one hand the number of genuinely good people I've encountered in this chair. You're one of them." Chloe held her teacup in both hands and said nothing, because she genuinely didn't know what the appropriate response was when a man who owned a 42-story building told you something like that. "The situation at the terminal with Hayes gave me an opportunity to step in," Garrett said. "But I want to be clear. I didn't buy that contract as a favor. I bought it because a man was exploiting workers, and because one of those workers happened to be someone who showed my mother more kindness in a single evening than most people in my professional circle have shown anyone in their entire careers." He leaned forward and set his cup down. "I'd like to offer you a position, Chloe. Director of Facility Operations across all Vance commercial properties. You'd oversee maintenance teams, working conditions, and staff welfare at every building we own. 37 properties across 3 states. Full salary, benefits, company vehicle, and a pension plan." Chloe's lips parted. The teacup in her hands suddenly felt very heavy. "I'm a janitor, Garrett. You're a janitor who shows up early, stays late, does the work right even when nobody's watching, and treats a 73-year-old stranger like she matters. That's not a job title, Chloe. That's a character reference, and it's the only one I need." The room was quiet for a long moment. Below the windows, Chicago moved in its usual rhythm. Traffic, trains, 3 million people going about their Monday morning. Chloe looked out at the skyline, then down at her hands, then at the framed photograph on Garrett's desk that she could now see clearly from this angle. It was Evelyn, standing in the garden at the estate, laughing, holding a cup of tea. The same garden where Chloe had eaten soup and talked about her grandmother, while a man she didn't know listened from the terrace above. Chloe reached into her jacket pocket and felt the smooth barrel of the silver fountain pen, Leonard Vance's pen. A promise, Evelyn had called it. When you put your name on something, it should mean everything. She looked at Garrett. "When do I start?" Garrett smiled. The same smile as his mother, warm, unhurried, carrying more behind it than the words that came with it. "Whenever you're ready." Chloe set her teacup down, pulled out the pen, and for the first time in her life, signed her name on something that felt like the beginning of everything she'd ever deserved.